Hi, and welcome back to Interpersonal Communication with Jayne Turk. So, today we're going to be talking about perception, and it's one of my very favorite topics. So, I always say that your perception is your reality because the way that you observe things determines how you're going to act, interact, react. And, super important, your perception is frequently wrong. I had a conversation with my husband the other day, and we were talking about a trip that we'd taken. Well, I thought we were talking about a trip we took coming back from Montana. And I had said something about how I'd done all this driving. And I just want to say we've made many cross country trips, and me driving is the exception. Usually my husband takes one for the team and does most, if not all, of the driving. And we were maybe 5 minutes into this conversation, and he was like, when we were coming from El Paso, and I'm like, no, no, no. I said Montana. And he said, no, 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 you didn't. You've probably had those conversations, right? Where you have been thinking you were talking about one thing, your partner was thinking you were talking about something else, and you might not have even clarified it at that time, and you might have left the conversation frustrated. So we're going to be talking about perception, all of the things that go into perception, and how to have some better outcomes. So let's get started. I pulled out the front page of the chapter of this textbook, and we're going to go over some of those elements today. And just as a reminder, with every new chapter, your responsibility is to do 2 chapter notes. So let's talk about the process of perception. It's going to be really helpful for you while we're talking about this if you have a pen and paper, scratch paper just to write some stuff down so we can do a couple of really quick activities. So let's start. I want you to think of 3 couples that you know. I'll give you an example of a fictional couple. I might talk about Minnie and Mickey Mouse. But you might think about 3 couples that you know. And I want you to write down their names. You're not going to need to share this with me. Nobody's going to know what you wrote down, but write down their names. So and so and so and so. And I want you to do that 3 times. So in the perceptual process, there's a reason that you selected not just those 3 couples, but it talks next about organization, but the name that you put first. So usually the name that you put first in the pair, my example was Minnie and Mickey, is you put the person first in the pair that you like the most. There are some other reasons you could put someone first in that pair. It might be the person that you've known the longest. It might be the person that you most recently spoke to. It might be that everybody refers to them that way. So, but there's a reason for it, whatever it was. When you're making a list of items at the grocery store, toilet paper might be first on your list because that's the thing that's most urgent for you to get, but not because it's the one that you're most excited about getting. So if you have toilet paper first and champagne down on the bottom, it might just be because that's how you're prioritizing and organizing how you're going to spend your money. The perceptual process also obviously includes interpretation, and we interpret the world around us based on so many different factors, including our previous experiences, including our expectations. And, great example for expectations. And you've all had this experience. You go and take a drink of whatever your beverage was, and you were expecting something different. And so it just tastes wrong and bad because, you went to grab a drink of your iced tea, but instead it was milk. So that's an example of how your interpretation is influenced in the perceptual process. And I think that when we talk about weather, for instance, and I know that right now there's weather going on in extreme amounts in certain parts of the country, depending on when you watch this video and when you see it. What's extreme? So living here in Texas, we had the airport shut down because we got a couple inches of snow. In Northern California, where I've lived for the past 25 years, a couple inches of snow is nothing. So it all depends on your interpretation. And then there's a negotiation process, which is how we are perceiving based on how other people perceive it, and then we negotiate what the reality is based on merging those interpretations. There are lots of influences on perception, and I am going to talk a lot about physiological, so I'm just going to kind of cover the other ones really quickly here. Access to information is going to influence your perception, and we certainly see that in terms of politics, right? The more information you have, the better information you have, the more differently you're going to see what's occurring than someone who doesn't have the same access to quality and quantity of information. And you can think about this in terms of your physical health, right? So if your doctor didn't ask good questions or didn't get good answers, you're not likely to get a good diagnosis. But the more information they have, and that's why they run all those tests, the more likely that they are for their perception to be accurate. Like I said, I'm going to get to physiological differences in a minute. Cultural differences, this is more than just our culture's way of doing things. We also tend to have ethnocentrism, that we see that the way that our culture, whether it's our microculture, like our family, or our macro culture, our society, that we're going to see this as a right and wrong thing. But we're also going to see what's good and bad. We're going to see even happy. I'm thinking the Day of the Dead celebrations versus Halloween are very different cultural approaches to a similar thought. And social roles. So not only are our expectations here in terms of what we're supposed to see and do, but our expectations for other people and how their roles, whether it's their gender or gender presenting, whether it's their age, whether it's their job, what we expect in those roles is going to influence how we perceive events. I'm going to spend a lot of time proving to you that our perception is wrong. And this starts with the things that I've already talked about and then is reinforced with our common tendencies. So the first one on the list is if I do it, it was a mistake. If you do it, it was intentionally wrong. Or if I do it, it wasn't as bad as if somebody else does it. So we tend to judge ourselves more charitably than we judge other people. We get really hung up on first impressions. When you meet somebody, that is the way that you see them until things change. In fact, I'm willing to bet that most of you either currently have or have had a really good friend that when the first time you met them, you were like, not so sure that I even like this person. And now you're best buds. But it took a while to overcome that hurdle of that first impression. We tend to assume that other people, especially people we like, are similar to us. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that when we get to the taste part of the physiological. So I'll wait to talk about that. We're influenced by our expectations. So I mentioned that earlier in terms of if you're expecting iced tea and you drink milk or vice versa. We're also influenced by that expectation. Do we expect this to be a good experience? Do we expect this to be a happy, positive outcome? And we are influenced by the most obvious. So that big blaring message that we send out isn't necessarily the real truth. So be thinking about this in terms of how we observe people and also how we observe events. So the thing that is first and foremost might be how we remember it, but it might not be the really accurate image of what was going on. And finally, we're going to look at how to check your perception and do a much better job of clarifying what you're seeing, what you're observing, at least for those times when it really matters. So let's get started. So when we experience touch, and these are all sense-based that I'm going to be talking about to begin with, and I'm thinking here about the sensation of being tickled. So some people like being tickled, some people hate being tickled. It's basically the same sensation though. So we're experiencing it. Our perception about it is, however, very and vastly different. If somebody gives you a hug, how do you experience that hug? And you would think that the two people in the hug would be experiencing it the same way. But because we bring our own definitions to that physical experience, we are going to experience it differently. So I just want you to keep in mind as we talk about senses, touch is lower on the list of the ones influencing our perception, but it definitely has a role. A little higher up is taste. So I included a picture of cilantro. I am one of those people that tastes cilantro like dish soap. I included artichokes because it's one of those things that I can say, ooh, I love artichokes. And you might go, ooh, I hate artichokes. And then my knee-jerk reaction will be, oh, but you would love them if you had them the way I make them. The reason that we do that is because we really do tend to assume that other people are similar to us. And if I like it, I really believe deep in my heart of hearts that you're going to like it too. And that the reason you don't like it is because you just have never had it the right way. The reality is, however, our taste buds are as unique as our fingerprints. And so this thing that doesn't taste good to you, biologically doesn't taste good to you and tastes different to you than it tastes to me. And yes, there's some cultural influences in there. So foods that I grew up with, I'm more likely to develop an appreciation for. Spices that were part of my cultural heritage would be things that I would be more likely to appreciate. But definitely understand that when we tell someone that oh no, you really would like this, we're discounting the fact that their experience is going to be in fact different than ours. And finally, I wanted to throw in there the experience babies have with food. So babies' taste buds, and this diminishes over time. So babies' taste buds are the strongest. Toddlers are super strong. The older you get, the more taste buds you actually lose. But babies are hardwired to not like bitter foods because poisons are more likely to be bitter. And so a baby who has a smaller body weight is going to be significantly more influenced by a small quantity of poison. Part of their biological development is that they're not going to like that. And that's why when you try feeding your baby its first vegetables, it's probably not going to be really fond of them. So taste, like all of our other senses, is a big influence on our perception. And next we get to hearing. And so you could see I don't have anything up there. I was going to put a link in. Instead, I decided to link it in the discussion board post because I didn't want to be cruel. Here's the thing about hearing. There's lots of things about hearing. You probably know that there are people who are deaf. There are people that are hard of hearing. And there's a whole range in between. But what you might not have known is that as you age, you lose the ability to hear certain frequencies. So one of the experiments that they did many years ago was they started putting in targeted messages, targeted anti-theft messages that were in the hearing range that only could be heard by teenagers. And so if I walked into this department store as an old person, I'm not going to hear the message playing over the speakers. But the teenagers are going to be hearing the "don't steal, we prosecute shoplifters" being played on endless repeat. What they found was it did have an impact. It definitely had an impact on the teenagers who obviously don't like listening to that message over and over again and were then more likely to not shop in your store. But they found that even people who couldn't hear it felt a little bit uncomfortable. And so most places have stopped using those, but I wouldn't know because I still wouldn't be able to hear them. So please click on the link that is in the discussion board post and test your hearing and see what your hearing age is, just for fun. So like I said, there's hearing by age and hearing. Oh, I didn't talk about dog whistles. Gosh darn it. Okay, so dog whistles. You're familiar with the literal, not the figurative. There's a whistle that you can blow and you're not going to hear it, but the dogs will come running. There's some theories that that's behind the legend of the Pied Piper. Again, it happens at a frequency that humans don't really hear. However, when we get into intuition, there is some scientific data that says that even though we don't consciously hear that dog whistle, we might subconsciously hear it. We might be aware that there is a change in the frequency. So it's something to think about and kind of cool. Okay, so I want to talk about smell. And the first thing that I want to talk about is smell is the only sense you have that does not get filtered by your brain. It happens right next to your brain, and your brain goes, aha, I recognize that smell. And so memories are very closely correlated with smell. You probably have things that remind you of your childhood or your grandparents, or the number one most beloved smell worldwide that brings people joy is the smell of fresh cut grass. And maybe it's because it reminds you of carefree summer days, but whatever it is, smells are related to memory. And you may wonder, diabetes, why is that in here? Well, because if you are diabetic and your insulin is not properly regulated, your body produces an odor that not only can people who are trained smell it, but you can also have an assistive dog who is trained in smelling that to warn you that you need to get your insulin. I thought that was fascinating. But even more fascinating to me was schizophrenia. So schizophrenics have a very distinct odor. And if you love someone who's schizophrenic, you might have even made the conscious connection between this smell and this disease, and then be able to identify it in other people. But where the research first came out was when they were studying admissions to mental hospitals. And they learned that the mental patients were actually more accurate and faster at diagnosing schizophrenia than the doctors were. And then they were able to, over time, figure out that there was a link between that and smell. So, super cool. In one of my many jobs, I worked at a mental hospital for a couple of weeks, and schizophrenics have a distinct odor. And once you've made that connection, you're never going to unmake that connection. Let's talk about sight. So I have lots of things up here. This is my visual slide. And the first thing up there is the famous dress. Now, what's really cool about this picture is because some of you watching this video right now are looking at this dress, and you're seeing a dress that is navy blue and black. And I'm looking at this picture of this dress, and I'm seeing a dress that's white and gold. And I love doing this in-person classes, or even on Zoom classes, where people are like, Mom, come look at this. What colors do you see? No way. Because it's fascinating how we perceive color. And I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. But this is a famous dress, and it has to do not with the manipulation of the photograph, but with the way that our eyes are perceiving of the color waves. And it's very interesting. The second image up on the screen, the numbered images with the apples, has to do with something I just learned about. And that is that 98% of the population, if you say, imagine an apple, they're going to see something between images 1, 2, 3, and 4. They might see a 3D image that they can even rotate in their mind. That's a pretty small perception of the population. They might see a more cartoonish image. It might not be in color. It might just be an outline. But about 1% of the population can't actually visualize things. And having that knowledge makes me wonder how much frustration could be relieved if people knew that some people just simply can't visualize an image. And so they've done many studies on this, put people in MRI machines and said, hey, imagine this thing, or here's a picture. Now recreate it in your mind. And everybody's brain has activity, but the people who are in the fifth group don't have as much activity, and they don't have the vivid activity as the people in any of the other groups. I think that's really fascinating how different we can be. In the next box, I have a sample of a color test. And when I got my bus driver's license, I had to go in and sit there in the room with the eye doctors. And the young woman, would show me a card, and I would say a number or an image. And she's going through them. And like the first image on here, which some of you may see and some of you may not, is an image of the number 12. And I went through and I was giving her numbers, or, that's a sailboat. And then we get to one card and I'm like, it's just a round circle with no different colored dots in the middle of it. And I'm like, that one doesn't have one. I thought it was just a test card to make sure. And she kind of smirked at me a little bit. And I said, wait, do you see something there? And she's like, she did. She could see what it was. Oh my gosh. So then we got in a conversation and I asked her, in all her years of administering these color tests, and she said virtually everyone she's ever given, including herself, had missed at least one. So that's not the big major red-green colorblind that you've heard about most of your life and that some of you may actually have. This is people who there's some minute shades that they can't see. Super cool. What are the implications of that? Well, it probably means that you have an outfit in your closet that you think goes together, and the rest of us know it doesn't. I know that was mean. My husband and we got a cat that was living in our woodpile, and we took it in and got her shots. And we were talking about the cat one day, and the cat was part Abyssinian in a really reddish, chocolatey brown and white. And my husband was so baffled because he was convinced that the cat was black and white. I thought he was teasing me. And in photographs, he could actually see that the cat was this reddish brown and white, but in person, the cat looked black and white to him. And more interesting to me, that both of his biological kids thought that we had a black and white cat too. But my kids, who got my genetic material, saw a reddish brown and white cat. So all of us have areas in color that we don't see. And finally, I included, there's a million optical illusions out there, and I just included one, which is both a combination of, what's your ability to see big and little pictures? How do you count? How many triangles do you see? And when we're looking at things, we're paying attention to factors that other people look past. Or you might be the person who pays attention to everything. When I'm in the classroom, I like to have people close their eyes, and one of the things I ask them is, how many doors are in this classroom? And you would think that that's a question that every student gets right. The answer is just the opposite. Almost every time I've ever asked that question, students have gotten the answer wrong, often because there's a door that they don't use. So even though it's there, even though it's right in front of them and they've all seen it, it's invisible to them. Any of you that have enjoyed Sherlock Holmes books know that Sherlock Holmes was such a great investigator because he paid attention to everything. And the reality is that's just not possible. And it often won't matter. So just be aware that what we're seeing is not going to be the whole picture. So let's talk about intuition. So you may be saying, we talked about all of our physical senses. Where does intuition come in? Well, I would like to argue that intuition is the subconscious collection of sense data. So we know we can see things that we're not seeing on a conscious level. If you do some research into Kirlian photography, we can photograph things that you can't see with the naked eye, that we're clearly aware of them on some level. I often think about heat and energy. So if you stand next to somebody, they're producing heat and energy, and they're putting it off, and you might feel uncomfortable in a warm environment that you can feel their body heat. If it's cold outside, you might be, stand a little closer. Let me get in some of that body heat. We know that we are capable of seeing some things, but we're seeing them at a subconscious level, and so we can't really debate them. One of the great experiments that's been done with this was done with amputees who had a body part amputated for whatever reason. And oftentimes they have phantom pain in that missing body part. And how can you scratch an itch for a body part that's not there? And one of the ways of treating it that's been really effective has been a mirror box. So let's say that my right hand was amputated and but it hurt. But I couldn't massage it, I couldn't scratch it. So they would put my left hand inside a box with mirrors that would make it look like I had two intact hands. And that helped my brain to process, so that way I could eliminate that phantom pain. Kirlian photography, if we take that, especially with a recent amputee, and we take a photograph of that missing body part, the electrical outline of the body part will still show up on the photograph. We could do it with a leaf. We could take a leaf and cut part of the leaf off, and then we take a picture. The picture is going to show at least the outline of the whole leaf. So some really interesting stuff is going on our subconscious level. I thought I wanted to go into politics when I was very young. And I was very excited to go to the mayor's prayer breakfast and meet a local member of a national political body. And I am going to be deliberately vague here. Really excited to meet this guy. And so I stood in line, got up there. But when I'm talking about expectations, I was expecting this to be an exciting moment to meet somebody that I thought had a really cool job. And we shook hands. I could not run to the bathroom fast enough to wash my hands, and I think I threw up. I have never had an experience since then that where I was so shaken meeting somebody. Many years later, someone who worked for this person was discovered to have been murdered in a particularly brutal way. And although this person was a suspect, there was never anybody caught or convicted for that crime. Do I believe in my heart of hearts that I picked up on subconscious sense data that said this is a bad person? I absolutely do. Could I be wrong? Also, absolutely. Because here's the thing. Stereotyping also happens at a subconscious level. So your brain isn't processing it, so you can't intervene in the cycle. It could have just been that there was something about this person that reminded me of somebody else that I didn't like. It could have been that he was wearing cologne that I associated with a bad person. And I picked up on that smell and just simply didn't make that connection consciously, but subconsciously. So I would tell you, if you read the book, The Gift of Fear, that you should always listen to your intuition, listen to that subconscious sense data, and also be aware that you need to be safe immediately. Consider later, was this something that maybe I was influenced by a stereotyping or a prejudice that I held? Or is there a possibility that I was picking up on a sight or a smell or a taste? Oh, and getting back to sight, we're going to talk more about this later on in the term, but lying has very specific tells that you probably pick up on a subconscious level, unless you're trained to look for them consciously. So maybe you picked up on that thing. So pay attention to your intuition, but also give other people a chance when it's safe for you to do so. So I really, really, really hope that I have persuaded you that there's all kinds of ways that your perception can go wrong. And because of that, and because we know that our perception can go wrong, we want to do better. So I want to talk to you about how to perception check. But before I even start with the specific steps in this skill, I want us to be thinking about the fact that you want to perception check when your perception is going to have an impact on a decision that you make. So if you can just wait and see, you might want to do that. But if this is something that's really weighing on you, I want to encourage you to go ahead and ask. So what do we normally ask? How do we normally do what we think of as perception checking? And we normally do it by saying, "What's wrong?" And I hope that right now you'll play along with me and I'll ask you, what's wrong? And what is it that you said out loud back to me? I'm going to guess that a whole bunch of you said nothing, or you said, I'm fine. And those are our typical responses. And sometimes we go at this in a more confrontational way. So instead of saying, what's wrong? We say, what the hell is wrong with you? In which case, you're more likely to respond defensively, and we're still never going to get whatever is the underlying issue resolved. So let me show you how to do it the right way. This skill has 3 steps. The first step is a neutral description of behavior. So your textbook just says a description of behavior, but I want you to make sure that you're not like, why are you such an asshole? Because that's not going to be super helpful. But you can say, you were really loud when you were talking last night. So neutral description of behavior. And then you're going to give 2 possible different interpretations. So it might be, was it that you were super excited, or was it that you were yelling over the TV set? Note, those are different. They're not both ways that I'm in trouble. And 3 are reassuring requests for feedback. So it might be, whatever's going on, I just want to know. Or whatever it is, let's talk about it. Or whatever it is, I can handle it. Or I'd really like to know what's going on here. So we're going to do multiple iterations of this. This is one of your simulations you're going to be writing about in your simulation journal. So let's go through this process. And I'm going to give you an example that came to me from a student from several years ago who came up to me after class one night and said, I think my husband's getting ready to leave me. What should I do? Wow. So one of my first questions was, have you done a perception check? And, why do you think that? So we practiced, and she went home and she said, honey, for the last month when you've been coming home from work, you have been pretty silent. You've watched the TV in silence. You're barely talking to me. We haven't been intimate. Then 2 possible different interpretations. Is it that there's something going on in our relationship? Is it something going on at work? Whatever it is, I really need to know. That reassuring request for feedback. And his response was, I didn't want to worry you. He was very definitely having some things going on at work. He had got a new boss that he didn't think liked him. He was afraid that he was losing his job. And he had built up this whole, I'm going to lose my job, and you're not going to want to be married to such a loser who doesn't have a job, and we'll lose our house, and you're going to divorce me. By talking about it, they were both able to be on the same team and work through it and, in fact, make things better for him at work. But let's just say that they hadn't had this conversation. She was convinced that he was getting ready to leave her. He was convinced that things were going to happen that were going to make her leave him. This is not an uncommon situation in relationships. And if you're both thinking that, you're going to start withdrawing, you're going to start withholding, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The relationship is likely to end. Probably many of you have a relationship that ended and you don't quite know why. And this might be why. That there was something going on that you never talked about, you never did perception checking about. They never did either. And so you both protected yourselves and withdrew until there wasn't a relationship anymore. And that's a fine outcome if that's what you want. It's just not always necessary. So a couple of reminders. The first one is, don't ask if you don't want to know. If you don't want to know if someone's cheating on you, don't ask them. Because if you ask this way, they are really likely to be honest. So don't ask if you don't want to know the answer to the question. And some people are going to need you to do this multiple times in your relationship before they trust that you really want to know. So you need to teach people that you can be trusted both by genuinely asking these questions, coming from a place of curiosity. And if I tell you, whatever it is, I can handle it, then I need to show you that I can handle it. So if I say to my 17-year-old, whatever it is, I can handle it, and they're like, well, I wrecked the car, I need to not lose my shit. So we're going to practice this. And I'll move my face out of the way there for you. You're going to post in the discussion board your perception checks. You're going to do 3 of them, and you're going to do this in one discussion board post. So the first one is, a family member suddenly stops talking to you, stops speaking to you, or texting you, whatever you prefer. So before you do this practice, you want to think, what would you say to them? So you're going to start with that neutral description of behavior. You're going to follow it up with, is it this or is it this? And your reassuring request for feedback might be something along the lines of, I miss you. What can we do to make this happen? Second one, your second scenario is, you've asked this acquaintance, so not a longtime friend, not a family member, but someone you know well enough, out to lunch 3 times in a row. And I've always gotten this response, I'd love to, but I'm really busy right now. I'm going to imagine that most of you at this point would simply stop asking. I've been doing this question for, maybe 25 years now. And it's one that really resonates with students because almost all of them have had this situation. And the reasons that people give for why they've said, I'd love to, but I'm really busy right now, are mind-blowing. And I think you need to hear them. So I really want you to practice asking this question. And then finally, let me move my head back out of the way. Longtime friend seems to be interested in a romantic relationship. So you want to be talking again. You're going to start by addressing their behavior. And I include this one because it's super awkward and super important. So a longtime friend seems to be interested in a romantic relationship. And you need to know, is this something that I'm going to even consider? Or is it that just somebody who is looking for a closer friendship? Am I misreading the signals? I am a professional communicator, and I have been for a really long time, and I so misread signals sometimes. So every time that I have been proposed to, I have burst out laughing. And I don't mean little awkward giggles. I mean deep belly laughs. It is amazing that after that anybody has ever married me. And I think back to, my old friend Bob, I sure wish he'd done a perception check before proposing, because I was getting ready to move out of the area and go to college elsewhere. Bob had just started a new job with a very large corporation, and he wasn't moving anywhere for a while. And we were having a great time hanging out, and both of us were very clear we were not looking for a relationship. We were just having fun. And so one night we're watching a movie, and he gets down on one knee, and I start laughing because I think this is a good prank. And he pulls a ring box out of his pocket. I laugh even harder because, wow, he's all in on this prank. He then starts to cry. And I'm horrified because why did he think things had changed? And making the situation even more awkward, I was a nanny at the time, and the family I was a nanny for walked in with me suddenly stopping laughing, Bob on one knee crying with the ring box out. Poor Bob. I'm really sorry if you see this, Bob. I'm really sorry. I totally had no idea that you thought that we were in a deeper relationship than just friends. So, practice the awkward conversations and avoid being Bob, or avoid being me, either way. Okay, so here's what you're doing work-wise. You're going to post your 3 perception practice checking by Wednesday night. By Sunday, read your classmates' practices. Read all of them. It'll just take you 5 minutes. Read all of them and respond to at least two of them. And when you're responding, I want you to think and share with them how you would have responded to their perception checks. So if the way that they did it would have pissed you off, say that. Or say, ooh, I would have actually opened up and been honest. And here's what I would have said. Talk to them about how they can improve, if you can think of something that they can improve on, or tell them what worked in their perception checking, because that's the interactive part of this class. We get to practice our skills, and then we get feedback from other real people, not just me, other real people about whether or not this would work. So, after you've done your perception checking, you're going to go into your simulation journal, and you're going to do that title, perception checking, and the date that you did it. And then in the body of that discussion board post in your separate simulation journal area, remember your questions that you're answering are, was a technique effective? And you can talk about the why or why not in great detail. That great detail, give me a sentence or two. Is a skill integrated? So is this something that you feel like you are already really good at doing, or do you need some practice on it? Super important to write down reminders for next time. My reminder is always, don't ask if you don't want to know, but your reminder might be something different. Your reminder might be, want to make sure that I'm doing these sometimes, or maybe I don't want to do these too much. And then as a reminder, before the semester is over, you need to do another one of these. So not in class, but I want you to go out and practice perception checking on someone in your life. And if you want to do it this week so you don't forget, that's fine. But go out and do an actual perception checking for real. And then give me a journal entry about it. So it's going to be a second simulation journal entry. It's going to be titled perception checking, probably a different date, and you're going to answer those same questions. Don't forget to do that, because that journal entry counts. And as we're wrapping up, I'm really curious to know, and I hope that when you're chatting with me, that you will chat about what surprised you most. We were looking at perception. Did you learn something? Was there some part of perception that you're like, oh my gosh, this explains so much? Or were you like, I totally am really good at analyzing this? Or you can talk to me about, what did you take from this? Was there something that you want to work on, or something that you want other people in your life to work on, and you're going to role model it for them so they'll hopefully learn from you? I'm really curious. And getting back to where we started, your perception is your reality. It determines your actions, your reactions, your interactions. Your perception is frequently wrong. And perception checking can help. So go out there, utilize this skill. I think it's one of the most valuable ones you can learn in this class. Give it a shot. Let me know. How is it working for you? Thanks for being here. I love you all. Have a great week.